Hey everybody, Jonathan Broadbent here, your host of UnWoke Academy. A quick shout out to our friends over at OBBM Network and BlessedNewsTV.com, two great partners in distribution of content. If you have content that you're putting out there and you're looking for help and a great platform to work with, I can't think of better than OBBM Network and BlessedNewsTV.com. If you're following the 100-100 party, we're at 100 days, 8 hours, 7 minutes, and 59 seconds until 4th of July. If you're not sure what that means, backtrack a couple of episodes where I talk about the big party and what's happening to move everything that we're doing out from under the thumb of weaponized regulators. That's kind of a whole story. Rather than get into that in this podcast, because we have so much to cover today, I'm going to dive right in. And you're going to have to buckle up. There's a lot to get through in this episode, and we're going to get into the weeds quite a bit in the world of finance. But these are things that are really important for you to know. By the way, if any part of this isn't clear or you'd like better clarification, please do feel free to add in the comments on whatever platform you're seeing this on, or email me directly at UnWoke. You can find my email address through virtually any of the social media platforms that we broadcast on. I want to make sure that this message in particular is crystal clear, even though we are definitely getting into the weeds. We're going into a rabbit hole war in here. And this has to do with property rights. Who owns the things that you think that you own? And I'm going to put this for a moment in the context of your home, because even if you don't own a home, you probably know the concept of buying a home, because for a period of time, and it's actually usually a long period of time, unless you have the benefit of being independently wealthy and go and plunk down a giant pot of cash, to buy your house for cash is really difficult. So people go to the bank and they sign up and they have a mortgage for some period of years. And during that time, you have the lending institution, whoever has agreed to loan you money to buy that house, they also want to be on the title for the home. And I think that makes sense to most people. They don't want to be on the hook for something loaning you money and then not have a recourse if suddenly you stop paying or something. So there's kind of this tug of war that goes on. It's a little jockeying for position on any of those sorts of things, where the lending institution, or sometimes in certain circumstances, especially for really high valued properties, you might have multiple different lending institutions. That's rare, but there's constantly this sort of jockeying for position, if you will, where they each want to be in pole position. So if something bad happened, they want to own the property. They want to own that house. Now, ultimately, when you talk to banks and lending institutions, they'll tell you point blank, they're really generally not in the business of real estate. So their hope is that they make all the money just on cash and they don't actually have to deal with the property itself. But if push comes to shove, they'll probably more than gladly take possession of the property if they're not getting the payments that they expect. And toward that end, they really always want to be in premier pole position, because there's a pecking order. If something defaults somewhere, they want to know that they're not like second, third, fourth, or fifth in line to get that money. And the same thing applies if you think about a home equity line of credit. So a home equity line of credit usually has worse terms because that lending institution is typically further down in the pecking order. And they want to feel that they have access to something of value if you don't hold up your side of the bargain. That's the way that home ownership or buying a home works. There is that sort of environment where lots of different entities or people want to be in the highest possible level of priority. And if you have a cosigner, let's say that, for instance, you're young and you get a cosigner, mom or dad may also, depending on your relationship with them and whether or not they're willing to co-sign in the first place, they may also want to kind of work with you on who is higher up in that pecking order. So ultimately, you could be, as the person buying the home, the concept is that you go out and work every month, you create that income, and you use part of that money to buy the house, and you feel like you own it, but you don't actually own it until those other people and entities are all removed. Once they're gone, you are the owner of that thing, with rare exception. But in the world of investments and deposits, things work differently. There are, and this gets a little bit cloudy and murky, but bear with me. I'm going to try to make this make sense. There is something called collateralizing, where there are financial institutions that can take a bundle of different things that they own or hold, even cash or securities, investments, mutual funds, that sort of thing. They might take that, and they're pledging that to another organization, and they make a little bit of money on that. So there are different terms, and actually, in order to try to make that clear, I'm going to put it in the context of something that is sometimes done for individual investors. And hopefully this makes sense. And then I'm going to get into how financial institutions can do it on a much larger scale and actually just simply do it for a little bit of incremental added revenue. Let's imagine for a moment that you are an individual investor that has $1 million+ invested somewhere. You have a portfolio of whatever it is: stocks, bonds, mutual funds, exchange traded funds. You have a 401k, IRA, whatever. Um, Anything that is not part of a retirement account, you might use that as what's called pledged collateral. And people do that sometimes. If you needed to borrow money, you might pledge that. If you know that you don't need access to your million plus for some long period of time, you might actually sign up and pledge that to a lending institution and tell them, if I default, you can go in and take the value, you can take the money out of my account. In the meantime, you can get lowered interest rate. I'm not suggesting or advocating for this. I'm just simply telling you a mechanism that does exist in the world of finance. And it is sometimes used. I've actually had a lot of exposure to it through my years in working in finance. But what ends up happening is, because they know that they're good and that you actually have it, and they can see it and kind of not really control it, but they can limit the amount of money you're allowed to take out of it. They know that they have something there to fall back on if you default. Hopefully you're with me so far. In exchange for that, you get really low interest rates. And if you are a smart, savvy investor, you might keep your investments there, because remember, your portfolio stays intact. Instead of drawing down the money, your portfolio stays intact. And let's say that you're successful at matching the interest rate that you pay on the loan, or even beating it. That's an extraordinary circumstance and something that is great for really wealthy people. And it means that over time, instead of drawing down that money and then trying to work to replace it, because remember, that's after tax money, you'd have to earn a lot more in order to put it back, and it takes a long time to put that money back again. Rather than and I'll put some numbers to this just so that it hopefully makes sense. Let's say you have $1 million and you want to borrow 300,000. It would take some period of time, if you took the 300,000 out and bought something with it, to generate enough income after taxes to replace the 300,000. And in the meantime, that's 300,000 that hasn't stayed in your portfolio. It hasn't been growing. It's just been removed, and you gradually replace it. This pledged collateral sort of circumstance, if you did that instead, as this the millionaire that you are in this hypothetical scenario, that 300,000, is not removed from your portfolio. You're actually borrowing from a lending institution that knows that if you default on your loan, they can go into your portfolio and take the 300,000 out plus some interest or something. Um, so your million stays intact, it keeps growing, and maybe it generates enough income that it makes the interest that you're paying on the loan neutral. That's collateralized lending. It's pledged assets, is a term that we use for that in the world of finance. So now that you have the basic concept, let's get into what financial institutions do. Financial institutions have billions and trillions of dollars, and depending on the custodian, and that's a term that's important for you to know, that's the organization that actually holds the money. You may have an organization that's some XYZ financial planning something. The name, when you get your statement, the name that's on the bottom of your statement in small print with an 800 number and a website, in case you're not able to get a hold of your broker or financial advisor, that typically is the custodian. That's the entity that actually holds the money. They can do something similar with your money. They can actually bundle up billions and trillions of dollars, not that $1 million scenario with 300,000. They can actually bundle up, collateralize, and they can make money off of pledging those sorts of assets. I'm kind of using the same terminology just to help it make sense, but slightly different terminology is typically used in the world of finance. But what ends up happening for the financial institution that has billions or trillions of dollars, in addition to whatever fees they might charge you, they can actually kind of boost revenue by making a little bit extra by pledging those assets that they hold. So most financial institutions do that, and it's just sort of out of sight, out of mind, and they get a little bit of extra revenue boost to their bottom line. It makes them more profitable. There is one of those custodians that I'm aware of actually that is very actually transparent about that. And I'm looking into them to see if that's a feature that they could actually turn on and off completely. But in this one institution, they actually share that revenue 50-50 with the client, which is pretty darned unusual. I know of them. I haven't done a whole lot of work with this one custodian, but I want to find out more about how they do that, how they communicate it. But I've been talking about that. If you saw the episode that I did a couple of weeks ago called You'll Own Nothing and Like It, and then a subsequent Substack post that I did that talked about that free template letter, this is what that pertains to. What we're looking at is the prospect, and it seems very real based on the articles that we're reading and some legal opinions that are coming out, that, and bear with me, we're in another layer of rabbit hole. This gets a little bit deeper even, but it's some pretty frightening stuff, and we need to be talking about this. There is concern that the way the laws have shaped up over the last 20 or so years, and then definitely after 2008, 2009, there is an outlet for those financial institutions that are using your assets and pledging those and getting money in the event of a financial collapse. Those organizations might technically be able to take complete possession of your money, of your assets. They might be able to take complete control and possession of everything that you own. That's frightening stuff. That gets into that whole jockeying for position, and it has everything to do with whether or not your money, your investments have been collateralized in any way. So in order to put a little finer point on this, I want to harken back to 2008. In 2008, I was actually with one of the big Wall Street firms, and I saw from the inside what happened with something called collateralized mortgage obligations, or CMOs for short. That was a way of taking people's mortgages, bundling them up, and then basically sort of reselling those mortgages, sometimes over and over again, in order to boost revenue and make profit. That's sometimes referred to as derivatives. And if you were around in 2008, 2009, those terms should be particularly alarming to you. Collateralized mortgage obligations and derivatives. We now actually have an environment where your assets, your money deposited in financial institutions is treated very much the same way as a collateralized mortgage obligation, except now it's a collateralized deposit obligation, if for lack of a better, easier to understand term. And now the rules, because of the way that 2008 played out and the collapse of many different financial institutions, dictates that in the event of a collapse, the holding institution, the custodian, becomes the owner of that asset. You, even though you feel that that's your money and you're the owner, there is an argument being made, and this kind of falls under the category of The Great Taking. It's a book that came out. You really need to look into that. I'll look up and see if I can post a link with the author's name and information. But that Great Taking is the beginnings of really deep dive into the laws and how they're written and what could happen in the event of a system-wide collapse of the financial world. In that collapse of the financial world, it is clearly speculated that those financial institutions, because they've collateralized it, they are higher up in the pecking order. The rules were rewritten in order to protect the financial institutions, which, again, jockeying for position, it moves you as the account owner down in the priority list. Even though it's your name on the account, you then effectively become a beneficiary of the account, but not the owner. That's some frightening stuff. So, yes, we've gotten into some really devious concepts that have been created by some nefarious legal minds. But here's where that free letter comes in. And I'm really pushing hard for some good feedback from the legal world. I want some good legal minds to get their eyes on that and give feedback, because in my view, what that's saying, and I'm going to actually illustrate some points with a specific custodian, but what that's saying is that you, as the owner of that account, you rescind and retract any authorization to use any of your assets to pledge collateral in any way, unless it specifically only benefits you. Now, there's a nuance there. I kind of created that because I had to, because there are some people out there that have accounts that want to use pledged collateral for their exclusive benefit, and that's fine. But it's the stuff that happens behind the scenes and off radar for the individual investor, the stuff that really only benefits the financial institution. We want to work to turn that off, because it's my belief, based on my understanding of the law and the way it's written. By the way, this is not legal opinion. This is an opinion of a veteran financial professional who understands custodians and how they work, and some of kind of the legal phraseology that we typically use in the world of finance. My belief is that use of that template letter will send the message to the custodians you use that you don't authorize it. You do not permit the use of anything that you've deposited for their benefit. I believe that either it forces their hand. They're either going to have to get back in touch with you and tell you that they will not comply, at which point I believe the suggestion becomes to find somewhere else to move your money to, so that it's not in harm's way. I'll pause there to add a little caveat. If there are people that are reading things about the Great Taking and disagree with this perspective and think that there isn't that imminent harm, my ears are on and my phone is open. I'd love to hear that feedback. But so far, All of the financial professionals that I'm speaking with are very alarmed and concerned about this. So based on that, I'm pushing forward as hard and fast as I can to try to get this message out and get as many people as possible. It costs you nothing. It's free. Take the template, tweak it however you want, get it by your lawyers, and get it into all your financial institutions. By the way, I'd love to have the feedback. If they respond to you in any way, whatever their response is, I'd love to hear that, because I want to create a database of the ways in which these custodians are responding. But it's my belief that what that's doing, if they do comply and they remove your monies, whatever your accounts are, from a pledged collateral or collateralized environment, that in the event of a financial collapse, there isn't anybody there that can step in and claim ownership of your money. That's my view. I've kind of thought this through from a logistical standpoint, and it's a little bit of a game of chess, but I do believe that that is the sort of thing that can step in and turn off and circumvent potential harm to your investment accounts. I hope that makes sense, because it's definitely a rabbit hole, but it's hard to explain, but we really need to tackle it. As I said, I'd love to have your feedback on this. If any parts of this are not clear, or you think differently, or you have somebody near you in your financial life, or if you're a financial professional and you believe that this is off the mark, please do give me your feedback, whatever it is, good, bad, or curious, or seeking clarification. Next step, I'm actually getting into a custodian, and we're going to go through their paperwork. So stay tuned for that. I'm Jonathan Broadbent. Thanks for listening to another episode of UnWoke.Academy.